Welcome back to another episode of Proof of Vision. Today we had on the team from Nillion, we had on Juan from the ecosystem side, and then we had on Dave as well from the product side. For those that don't know, Nillion provides blind compute. You can kind of think of Nillion basically as a solution that allows for data to be private and securely stored and encrypted while keeping the data actually still accessible, right? So in this episode, we dove pretty deep into the problems surrounding privacy, just conceptually, and why not only like these large, massive, enterprises and corporations should be concerned around data privacy and confidential compute, but also individuals and consumers as well. So, today there are already some very interesting use cases that and applications that are being built using Nillion that can be useful for real people, not even crypto natives necessarily. So, yeah, we got to break it down, discuss the actual Nillion infrastructure stack as well on the architecture side, getting into how both these the on-chain and off-chain components of Nillion enable data privacy. So yeah, I think this episode will be pretty good for both people who are already familiar with Nillion, who maybe want to learn more about the recent developments, and then maybe even like almost skeptics, you could say, people that aren't familiar with Nillion and who maybe are still wondering why the solutions for maybe data privacy, private compute need blockchain, and why individuals should actually care about privacy in general in the first place. Welcome back to another episode of Proof of Vision. So today I have the Nillion team on with me. We have Dave and Juan. Do you guys maybe want to give a brief background on yourself? Dave, you want to start first?
Yeah, hey, I'm Dave. I'm the head of product at Nillion. My background, actually, my PhD was in MPC, so in cryptography, which is fun. Then did a few startup things, had my own startup for a bit, and then ended up at Nillion, kind of trying to bring privacy to the masses, which is quite fun because it takes what I did with my research to actually try and make it usable in the real world, which is always the hardest challenge.
Great, great. Juan?
Yeah, I'm Juan. I'm ecosystem growth lead at Nillion. My crypto journey started more on the L1 settlement layer side of things. I quickly started learning about privacy and realizing that I actually think there's a huge gap here in terms of what crypto can versus cannot accomplish without reasonable privacy across the board. And that can mean different things for different people, but the kind of privacy that we're focused on here at Nillion is data privacy, and I'm sure we'll go into how we tie that back to the blockchain and other crypto terminology that your listeners may be familiar with, but that is my story.
For sure, yeah. Thank you guys for the intro. So yeah, let's start off at a very high level, like for someone that maybe has never heard of Nillion. Can you guys go into, I guess the like explain like I'm five. What is Nillion, right? Yeah, kind of tie it back into what more traditional crypto audience would be familiar with.
Sure. So I'll take it since Dave's the giga brain of this conversation here, and I'm the one who usually has to have it explained to me like I'm five. So really the easiest way to think about what Nillion does is it is a technology layer that is not necessarily a crypto blockchain, which I think is what most people think when they first come across it is, oh, it's an L1 or it's an L2 or it's a lot of these different terms that aren't necessarily applicable. It's what it is it's an agnostic technology layer that can integrate to any blockchain or any Web2 application, really. And we'll talk about the combination of different builders and apps we have in our ecosystem. But what it allows you to do is essentially extract aggregated insights without actually seeing the underlying raw data or who it belongs to. In many cases, depends on how you set it up. But what this enables is a variety of use cases across AI, healthcare, DeFi, identity management solutions, all kinds of things where historically the main barrier to being able to take some of these ideas to market was the fact that this data was so sensitive or proprietary or any of these other adjectives you might use to describe it that companies simply couldn't run the risk of storing it and then doing stuff with it. So this allows them to completely sidestep that whole problem, never actually take custody of that data or be able to see it in its raw format, which unlocks so many different commercial use cases we'll go into, and really opens up the door to exploring new angles and new things that we can do with this kind of technology.
Right. Yeah. I think it's especially important to highlight, yeah, the enterprise side of things, commercial side of things. Definitely like one of the main qualms that you hear about even people like JP Morgan, yeah, expressing like those kind of concerns around like I guess public chains versus I know JP Morgan, they went out and made their own chain. So it definitely is like a real concern that you hear about the sensitive data. So let's dive deeper into I guess the Nillion architecture. So can you kind of explain what goes into blind compute? Can you give like a high level overview of the blind compute as a concept, and then how can this tie into more like real world applications, like you mentioned, healthcare and some other stuff like that?
Yeah. So if we think about a computer, right? A computer essentially has storage or memory, and it has computation, right? So we can broadly split the blind computer into those two things. So let's talk about storage. Storage needs to be secure. It has all of my really private, sensitive things. So the way that we think about that is that storage needs to be decentralized, right? So we have a network of nodes. These are not nodes on the chain. These are decentralized databases that are run by lots of different independent entities. And each of those nodes, when I store data on the Nillion network, is getting like a share of my piece of data. So let's say I've got my data here and I want to share it on the network. I essentially locally split that into, let's say, 5 different pieces, and each of the nodes gets one of my pieces of data. Now, what that means is that each node individually, if they are corrupt or malicious, they don't learn anything about my data. They just look random to them. But only when they kind of work in unison, or I get all of my shares back from the nodes, can that data actually be computed on or reasoned about and reconstructed. So that's how we think about the storage part of it. The computation part of it, some of our computation happens under MPC, which is this all of the nodes in this network kind of communicating to get the output of this stuff, of the query that I'm making. But we also think about computation, larger scale computation inside TEEs, our confidential environment, because in reality, doing computation under all of these niche pets like homomorphic encryption, like MPC, it cannot scale in the real world. So if you want to run large language models, big AI systems, you have to be doing it inside TEs right now, because that's the only way to do it fully. So we think about storage, we think about computation. I'll give some examples of how this is in the real world, right? Everybody nowadays is giving most of their information to ChatGPT, right? I do it, everyone does it. You're inputting stuff, you're saying, hey, I don't know, I've got a rash on my foot, like, tell me about this, or I need help with my insurance quote, or whatever it is, right? And you have absolutely no idea what's happening to your data once you input that thing. All you know is that it goes somewhere and you get a reasonable response. And it's fantastic, right? You get a really great response and it's really helpful. But that's really dangerous. That you don't know what's happening to that data. You don't know where that data is going to be sold to in the future. You're probably going to be sold back to your insurer and your premium is going to go up. So one of the things that we actually offer right now, we have a product that's called, we call it NIL GPT. It's kind of in beta right now, but essentially it does ChatGPT, but privately. Your data, when you ask the questions, goes to an AI model that's run inside a TEE, so nobody can see what you're asking. And any data that's being generated from it, your chats, is being stored in a decentralized way on our storage network. So you're able to get the similar benefits that you get from ChatGPT, but you can do it in a secure way. And I think that type of example is really powerful in showing you can have similar benefits of like modern day technology, but privately. And I think that's really important right now in our day and
Right. I
age.
think that's a very good example. Before I move on, yeah, we can kind of dive a little bit deeper into that, because normally people think of, you think of the chat interface, you think of like a more retail consumer crowd. So do you think that do you think it's a battle to convince individual consumers that, hey, like you actually should care about keeping your data confidential? Or is this more like, because normally what you would hear is like big corporations, right, are the ones that care about, sensitive data. They want to train, but they don't want to, like, it's all sorts of companies, right? Which is valid. So what is the case for like individuals, kind of caring about that use case?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard, right? No, this is the problem. Nobody cares about privacy until it matters, right? So nobody cared about giving 23andMe all of their DNA data until they went bankrupt and then were basically auctioning your data off to the highest bidder, right? So nobody cared about this because it was a really good service. I got to find out about my about my DNA, right? That's awesome. That's really interesting. And nobody cared about the privacy until it mattered and my data was about to be solved. So this is the problem. Often the privacy aspect of this is a delayed thing, right? It doesn't matter at the time. Me inputting my data to ChatGPT now doesn't matter now. I get an immediate answer about how to do my insurance or how to do my tax return. That's great, but what people are not realizing and not able to reason about is in 5 years' time that becomes important because suddenly there's a massive data lake about me, and that can do me serious damage. So I think that it's a big issue. People don't care about privacy, and that's tough.
Alchemix Finance empowers you to spend and save at the same time with a self-repaying, interest-free, non-liquidatable loan. Deposit your assets and access your future yield today. Available on Mainnet, Arbitrum, and Optimism. Head to alchemix.fi to get started.
I would add to that I think, unfortunately, and we can touch on some of the things that have happened even just in the last year. Unfortunately, a lot of it requires a sort of awakening, and everybody has their moment. For the people who use 23andMe, this was their moment, right? And we can go into some of the solutions that have actually been built specifically to address this problem within genomic sequencing on Nillion. Actually, I think that's a great example to go into. But at the end of the day, what it means is, for people who had their home addresses and KYC information and balance and crypto balances leaked in any of the centralized exchange breaches of this last year, that was their wake up moment, right? When you start to see real world attacks like wrench attacks, as they'd call them, kidnappings and all sorts of things that really nobody wants to experience or be at risk of. You have on the genomic sequencing side of the 23andMe stuff where people are like, wait, hold on, I paid for the service, but that data doesn't actually belong to me. And now somebody else can bid for that data. And why is somebody else bidding for that data? And why is it either a giant pharmaceutical company or a health insurance company that's most interested in that, right? Like, I guarantee that's not necessarily because they have your best interests at heart. So, the whole idea of data sovereignty and taking back control of your digital footprint and your digital life is something that requires sort of catastrophic events at scale for people to understand, in the same way that maybe seatbelts at some point were seen as a nice to have. Now they're seen as a need to have. And it's actually the minority of society that chooses not to wear seatbelts because the implications of not wearing them and the risk that you run by not wearing them are obvious to most people, right? So, I think there's some examples like that, and I'll talk about actually Monadic DNA because I'm sure we'll go into more of the apps on Nillion. But Monadic DNA is a privacy preserving genomic sequencing service built on Nillion that actually came out of the ETH Denver 2024 hackathon. And essentially what they figured out was, hey, these big tech companies, 23andMe included, are essentially harvesting user data. Yes, they're giving you valuable insights that, again, this demonstrates that people are willing to pay for these insights, right? Because it's not a free service. It's not like you are the product. In a way, you are the product, but you're also paying for the service, which is even worse than something just like Google, where it's free at least. But in this scenario, they figured out this was a huge problem. And under the existing frameworks of technology before, there was simply no way to give you insights into your genomic data and composition without being able to essentially custody that data. And even if they didn't eventually end up selling it, it could be exploited, it could be leaked, there could be a variety of other things. Basically, anything that is not encrypted and held in a database is going to be exploited or leaked at some point in time. The question is when. And so what we're trying to sidestep is the possibility of that ever occurring at all, right? So what Monadic DNA built was essentially the service where what they're trying to do is give people back control over their genomic data so that they can go get privately sequenced in a lab that's going to be built out specifically for this purpose, and then get those insights completely privately. And if you're familiar with crypto, you know the concept of private and public keys. That's exactly how this works, right? You have a private key, and with that private key, you can either grant access to or revoke access to your genomic information. So that's very different from a service like 23andMe, where even if they say, oh, under GDPR, we have to allow you to revoke consent to this data, it's still a trust me bro promise, right? You don't have cryptographic proof and a guarantee that that data is no longer in their server. Whereas if you're using something like Nillion's blind computation, you have cryptographic assurances that if you say, I don't want this company to use my data for anything anymore, you can revoke it because they never had it in the first place. Honestly, it's math, but it sounds like magic. That you can simply have all of the benefits of modern technology without ever actually giving over custody of your data to anybody else. And that's what allows you to remain in control. So, these are huge use cases, and biotech and DeSci 2.0, as we call it, is not going anywhere anytime soon. If anything, this is just an industry that is growing exponentially. And they simply will not be able to do the things they need to do, especially in the era of constant breaches and hacks and all these other things, without using blind computation to safeguard user data and be able to provide that guarantee.
Right. I think one of the interesting kind of analogies that you brought up was the seatbelt analogy. Yeah, like today most people do use seatbelts, but then I think the other thing around that is like most people have to, right? Like it is the law. So do you think that that's like a part of it at all? Do you think governments are going to be kind of yeah like mandating in a way certain areas like healthcare or other sensitive areas to have some kind of more strict measures around that, right? Like even in crypto, you've seen like Western European nations. Like I think you guys are familiar with the world coin, kind of like yeah, casting an eye on them, like hey, can you guys like make sure you're complying with all of our stuff? Maybe we don't know exactly like what's going on. So yeah, what do you think about that of like regulation? Like, do you think governments are going to want to maybe mandate this in some areas? Like, just give me your general thoughts on that.
So I'll also let Dave chime in, but I mean, specific to Monetic DNA, because we've done a lot of work on this, and I should add that this isn't theoretical anymore, right? Like the pilot was already done. I myself participated and gave a saliva sample, and I have my genomic insights that are fully privacy preserving. So this isn't like we're dreaming of a future, right? This is literally already happened. This exists. There are 40 people who have done this in real life, including myself and Dave and a few others on the team. But you know, even the founder of Monetic DNA who talks about this at length, this is his area of expertise. States like the state of New York mandate now that newborns go through genomic sequencing, right? And that means that they are essentially, yes, and I think more states are starting to think about this as well. And basically what that means is that they are by force having people put the genomic information into a database that they cannot guarantee will never be breached. So this is a huge problem. And what that means is that it's unlikely that these states will revoke these mandates. But what is likely is that they'll start to realize that they simply cannot force people into what is a honeypot, right? So they'll have to adapt to technology that allows them to do these things in a way that is actually privacy preserving and can safeguard that data. And so, you know, from the founder of Monetic DNA's perspective, it's actually that privacy will be mandatory for a lot of companies, right? Companies will have to use blind computation if they use certain, if they're safeguarding or they're computing on any sort of sensitive, especially health data by law. So, a lot of people hear the word privacy and they think about a privacy that was like 5 or 10 years ago. 5 years, when I refer to crypto, where it sounds like privacy equals bad, privacy equals scary. And therefore privacy has regulatory, an uphill battle from a regulatory perspective, but it actually might be the opposite, right? Which is that if you're not using privacy enhancing technology, you're going to have the problem, right? Because now regulation is going to be on the side of mandating privacy preserving technology. So, for a lot of these use cases, it's very likely that it won't be an option. It'll be that if you want to go into a certain business vertical, you have to adopt this technology by law, because otherwise you simply cannot offer your services without putting users in an inordinate amount of risk. But I don't know, Dave, if there's something you'd add to that.
I think the only thing I would add is that we have had privacy preserving law for a while now, right? We've had GDPR, we've had the equivalent stuff in the US and all over the world. The issue with that is it always just makes it into a game, right? Companies are now, they have like a game they have to play. Just because you're GDPR compliant doesn't mean that the person in there can't, the company can't do anything totally malicious. It means that you've basically done a tick list of things. I think the thing that we want to enable, yes, we want to enable people to meet those regulatory compliances 100%. But I think what we want to enable is like privacy by default, making it so easy to build things that are privacy preserving that it's no longer a choice. 5 years ago, and even now, it's a big choice between I want to build my app or do I want to build my app with privacy? And it's like, oh my God, I can do this in 1 week and I can do this in 1 month. And I think that's what we want to do, is actually just make that it's not really a choice anymore. It's like, cool, I can just use technology, and it won't just be Nillion's technology. It will be the whole industry hoping to go in this direction. But it's not a choice anymore. It's just, oh, cool, yeah, we do it, but we do it the privacy way because it's just as easy. And that's cool. And that's really what we'd like to unlock here, which is fun, I think.
Yeah, definitely well put. I think yeah, you kind of like hit the nail on the head when it comes to like education and stuff like that. It's like just not a good like the better way is to like not have to educate the clients or the users at all and just provide them like a an alternative that's just as good as what they're used to. So I guess that applies more broadly in crypto, not just privacy. But yeah, so I think earlier, Juan, you mentioned, yeah, I think you brought up AI, and I think it's definitely important to unpack of like what, I guess, yeah, like the whole idea around like the internet for intelligence and like what is I guess, what is broken with how people kind of use the internet today? Like, yeah. And then with AI, is there like, what are new risk vectors, right? So I think actually on the show, we've had like multiple AI researchers on, and like a common denominator is like they think there's going to be like the equivalent of like a 9/11 for AI, so something like that, right? Because earlier you guys were talking about like some of these very catastrophic events for data privacy, right? Yeah, like Coinbase, you had 23andMe, you even had the other recent one as well, the what's it, the Google, and it was a whole bunch of providers actually. But yeah, so I guess like, how do you see AI coming into the picture with Internet for Intelligence, and like, why do you think I guess the like go to the way that people think about using the internet today may have to change in the age of AI?
Yeah, so I know we talked about this before, before the recording, but this article that we published about the Internet for Intelligence, which highlights a couple interesting stats. One of them is that 38% of employees in 2024 use unauthorized AI tools at work, which is called shadow AI, right? So let's like think about why that might happen. For example, at Nillion, we have tons of meetings every day like everybody else, but we're a privacy company. We understand the risks of not adhering to that, and we do not think it's worth it, right? Which means that, for example, we couldn't use a third-party meeting recorder for every call we join. As you can imagine, you're at a competitive disadvantage versus whoever you're up against if you have to be manually jotting down things and then trying to connect the dots versus having a full-time AI agent meeting recorder that is doing all of that for you. And you've seen the tools that exist today. They're amazing, right? The problem is a lot of companies will say, no, you straight up can't use ChatGPT at work. You can't use these AI meeting recorders. You can't use all these things. Why? Because we cannot have you putting proprietary, sensitive, and confidential company information into a server owned by a third party. And we don't know what's going to happen with that, right? Like, this is obvious. Corporate espionage is not like a new thing. It's been happening as long as businesses have been around, and it's something that everybody's aware of. And that's why they have things like chief security officers and other roles, that look after this sort of thing. But employees say, well, I can't do my job without using these tools effectively because we're in 2025. So I'm just going to do it anyway. And then what ends up happening is this data inevitably ends up getting uploaded to these third-party servers, and then it gets sold or breached or leaked or whatever it is. And again, it's not even about the company itself that you're giving it to having any malicious intent. It's enough that one rogue employee with the credentials to access that information is able to, that puts everything at risk, right? So again, that's the key part of blind computation, is that even if somebody wanted to and was a malicious actor, they literally couldn't because there was nothing to access in the first place, right? And so going back to this question you're asking about AI and the big catastrophic events and all this, what we ended up doing was just building solutions to our own problems. So now we have a privacy preserving AI meeting recorder, right, where I can join and have a conversation with you or with Dave where we might want to discuss confidential or sensitive subjects that are not ready for the public to know about. And we have a guarantee that the recorder that's in the meeting is not being uploaded, like that information is not being uploaded to a third party. Only I and the people I share it with have access to it. And so, and it has all the abilities of any of these other third party tools to generate key action items, summaries, all these sorts of things, right? So we have that. Then on the other side, we have our own sort of ChatGPT privacy preserving alternative that we use. So we start to eliminate all these sort of attack vectors. And within the crypto world, I know this podcast covers a lot about crypto. We're always talking about like smart contract exploits and all these other things, but we need to also start thinking about data exploits, right? Which is a huge problem, which cost the companies that have gone through data exploits in 2024 alone about 5 million in exploit, right? And that's just the actual incurred costs that you can calculate. That doesn't take into consideration the irreparable brand damage it does to companies that have breached and betrayed their customers' trust, who will now never use them because they put them at risk somehow, or just made them the targets of constant phishing and spam and other unwanted advances from the black market that buys this information and then uses it for these purposes, right? So I think I've maybe veered a little bit off tangent, but basically what I'm trying to say here is all of these tools and all these things we take for granted, and we just say, hey, that's the workflow, and like all data is just being given to third parties. There's nothing to do about it. That's not true, right? And that is going to cause problems, and already is causing problems that can be measured in terms of the loss, right? The monetary loss incurred by these companies today. And so we're providing solutions to that, and we're seeing more and more interest from other companies to start implementing this internally for their tooling. And obviously it's companies within the privacy vertical at first who are most acutely aware of this, but then it's any enterprise that has internal compliance requirements where users can't use ChatGPT, but they can't compete with their competitors if they're using ChatGPT. So you need to have some sort of privacy preserving AI solution, right? It's basically we're trying to make it so you can have your cake and eat it too. So that's where we're at right now.
Right, right. So I think we definitely spent a lot of time like laying the landscape, kind of, which is actually very important, right? To actually get people to kind of care. Especially, I think it's really good to discuss what was the genomic app name again?
Monadic DNA.
Magnetic DNA. Yeah, yeah, stuff like that. I think is like very instrumental in yeah, kind of getting people to actually like pay attention to the use case. But now I think we can kind of get more into into the weeds and into the architecture a little bit. So yeah, I guess maybe a little bit more for Dave. Can we kind of like break down the dual layer architecture of Nillion with PetNet and then nil chain? So can you kind of, yeah, maybe break down those two sides of the equation, and then like how does this fit into the end goal of basically like confidential compute, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it's important that we consider Nillion kind of as two, as you say, as two networks. I guess we've got the chain. It's a Cosmos chain. This deals with coordination and payments. That really we think about this as payments and access to the PetNet. So I will come on there and I will basically pay like I do on Amazon, where I pay for credits or I pay for access to AWS services. I'll come to the nil chain to essentially gain access to the PetNet services, the security network that I was describing earlier. So broadly, that's the nil chain is interesting, but it's not the really interesting bit that we have is this PetNet thing. So let's focus on that. So on the PetNet, we have, as I was saying earlier, decentralized storage ability, right? So under multi-party computation, we split this data up and we share it amongst the nodes. I can then do computations on that. So I can say, let's say I've got a load of data about people have filled in a survey and it's talking about rating my restaurant, and I want to reconstruct the data about how many people from New York came to my restaurant and think it's good, or do some sort of basic filtering and querying. We can do that fully under MPC. That's great. But for this large computation on the PetNet, we not outsource everything. We go to our confidential computing stack, which is stuff running TEs. So this is the big AI models running TEs. This is where Monadic DNA will be I don't want to say sequencing their DNA, but running their DNA algorithms to understand this. So they're basically porting data securely from at rest, where it's totally secure in the database side of the thing, to the TE environment, the confidential compute environment, where it is reconstructed, but it has the guarantees of being inside the TE there. And we can run these large-scale algorithms. Because in an ideal world, we do all of this on the data at rest, and it's still secret shared. But the reality of where cryptography is right now is that is not scalable to the types of workloads and the types of things that people want to do. I'll give a very quick example. If you want to run a large language model, right, that's not going to happen under MPC or even under FHE, to be honest. But in a TEE, where the trust guarantees are different, and we have to be very clear that they are subtly different, and there are not as big a trust guarantees as you have under MPC, but it is now possible. We can run very large language models, like 70 billion parameter, 100 billion parameter models, securely, which I think is a massive step forward. And what we are seeing is that people care much more about that than being able to run very, very small, like linear regression models fully under MPC. It's a trade-off, right? It's a spectrum there.
Right, right. Okay, and I think it's good to provide an overview of how things actually work behind the scenes. So yeah, earlier we were discussing the commercialization and the kind of enterprise use of this kind of stuff, and you guys put out the enterprise cluster. So I was wondering, can you guys maybe walk through some of the like high profile partners, and then what is the like how are you selling these companies, right? Like what's in it for them? What does it mean for these enterprise end users? Yeah. What are all the implications basically of enterprise cluster?
So So this enterprise cluster, to be very clear, these are the enterprises that are running the NILDB nodes. So this is in the PetNet security network side of it. So we have, I think, off the top of my head, we have about 10 of these nodes running, right? And I think one of the first signals that this says is that enterprise is interested in this, right? That they're interested in running these nodes so that your data, when you split it up, some of it is stored by Alibaba Cloud and some of it is stored by Deutsche Telekom. And that's good because the underlying trust assumption there is that these two companies are never going to collude. Right, then that's ultimately like the cryptographic thing that you're doing there. You're saying we've got these totally distributed and decentralized organizations around the world, and my trust assumption is these people are never going to collude together because of whatever political reasons, commercial reasons. They're never going to talk to each other, which is great. I think moving forward, what is going to be great is these companies maybe starting to actually build their own solutions on top of their nodes. So they're running their nodes here, but also they start to build some of their solutions on top of Nillion, which I think is a medium to long-term plan, which is really, really exciting there because you get real big players in the space, just in the world, big companies adopting this type of technology. And I think that's how you get it adopted into the real world, which is really fun. Juan, I don't know if you have anything to add there.
No, I just add that I think this really showcases that people oftentimes say, like, why would these tech giants want to, or why would they accept or embrace a technology that effectively detracts from their current commercial revenue model? And the fact of the matter is the world is changing, and a lot of them are seeing that this gives them different and distributed revenue models. And we can go into a little bit about how the consumer apps built on these things work. But what I think this is really it's just a vote of confidence, right? From these huge conglomerates saying, we understand that things are changing. We don't want to resist this change. We want to see how we can be a part of it. And I think that's really refreshing to see, right? Because we can have everything we have right now, but just built in a way where it ultimately benefits the end consumer, right? And that's what we want, right? We want the consumer. We want an efficient market. We want the consumer to benefit from these things, not just all the value and all the power to accrue to these centralized entities. And so, this is really cool for me to see.
This episode is brought to you by Pendle. Pendle is a leading protocol in the DeFi yield sector, operating as a permissionless yield trading protocol, facilitating the tokenization and splitting of any yield-bearing assets in DeFi. This allows users to speculate on future yield or earn a fixed rate on their assets. Learn more at pendle.finance.
Yeah, you mentioned the consumer apps. I think it'd be good to definitely unpack some of that. Also, like Dave was mentioning, some of these solutions that these very large companies might actually want to build with Nillion. So could you maybe provide a little bit more color there on what these enterprises can actually build?
Yeah, so I'll go into the consumer applications because right now what we're talking about with enterprise cluster is they're actually participating in the infrastructure of the network, right? It's not like there is a consumer application. They are nothing that we can announce at this point in time, right? That we can publicly speak about. But what we can publicly speak about is that these companies are running infrastructure for our network, right? Which means that they're participating in it actively. As nodes, you can call them nodes in the PetNet cluster. However, when we come to consumer apps, there's one interesting thing that I've learned over time, which is that as a huge privacy advocate for myself, just digital privacy and privacy in general, I've learned that education and the ideology that is tied to privacy is always going to be important, but very few people, if any, come to care about privacy for that reason, right? That is a very select niche of people that care about it. So people come to care about privacy for two reasons. One, or let me rephrase, come to care about or come to use, even if they don't care about privacy, for two reasons. One, catastrophic events within their own life that make them realize the risk that they're taking by not utilizing this technology. We've already talked about that today. Two, realizing that they have two alternatives. Either they use applications that are free, but that are on the back end, harvesting and selling their data to a third party who's using that data in some way that may not be beneficial to them, and they're not seeing a cent of it. Or two, utilizing privacy-preserving applications built on Nillion, which are now generating new passive income revenue models for these end users. And what I mean by that is, right now, there are all kinds of things you can do to actively sell your data. Like, you could do mTurk and other things where you're filling out surveys, and basically it's almost like consumer insights, right? You're getting paid per survey and things like that, where it's first party data that you're contributing voluntarily. But when's the last time you got paid, because somebody, sold your IDFA, your unique device identifier, to a third party so you can be retargeted on Facebook. Never, right? Nobody's ever been paid for that. It's just the ad networks and the middlemen that are benefiting from that. What these applications on Nillion are doing is, because again, the users are the only ones who own their own data, is creating a new commercial model where users can effectively lease their data to a third party that may in some way benefit from acquiring it or computing on it, I should say, and be paid per query. So, for example, if I had my genomic insights today and it was privacy preserving, there would be a world where I could say, I'm okay with selling it to this pharmaceutical company for $1,000, $500, whatever the market is pricing it at that day. But what we're offering is something different, where we're saying my data is now in this encrypted database, NILDB, and a third-party researcher could come in, a medical research company, pharmaceutical supplement company, whatever it is, and I could say, if they tap into my data as part of their computation where they extract an insight from it, this is the price that I'm willing to allow them to do it for. So if somebody comes in, they say, I need males ages 30 to 40 that work out twice a week and have this specific thing within their genomic profile, it could be that I get paid $1 if that data gets computed on and they get an insight from it, right? So we're essentially creating this new commercial model where all these users can come into these applications, get all the valuable insights they're already getting from the non-private apps, but we can go a step further and say we can now allow them to opt in to that data being monetized in a way where part of that revenue goes directly back to them. Of course, this also involves the applications and how they want to structure the kickbacks or the revenue. But it enables this for the first time where, because you've never actually handed over custody of your data to a third party, it can never be reused more than the one time it was computed on. So effectively, that means that I could have my genomic data in this encrypted database and be paid on a recurring basis for the rest of my life, because if they ever want to compute on it, I'm being paid. I never handed it over to anyone, so they can't reuse it even if they wanted to, right? So there's a lot of game theoretical angles to this, of course, of how will certain people react to this and competitors to the others. How will this affect pricing models? But at the end of the day, we can reduce friction for developers to use privacy technology, like Dave said, and we can then allow that underlying base of the technology to allow the app developers to offer revenue models to their users and also generate revenue without selling that user data to a third party. Then it's a win-win for everybody involved, right? It's a win for the applications, it's a win for the users, and it's a win for privacy. So we've already touched on Monetic DNA. There's a few others that are very interesting, and I can't go through all of them right now in the interest of time, but I'll just name a few. One is Stadium Science. Stadium Science is essentially their tagline is something like turning medical research into a game. And basically, the way I describe it always is like a reverse mullet. So party in the front, business in the back, because you come in, it's very gamified. The crypto component is abstracted, right? So this is another key part. We have all kinds of apps building on us. Many of them will never go to market through crypto Twitter. They'll never go for crypto users. They're simply using Nillion in the back end for computation, private computation. And Web 2 is their audience, right? And they're going for TikTok and they're going for Instagram. They're going for all these different channels that aren't the channels you're probably used to with crypto Twitter. But with something like Stadium Science, you come in completely crypto abstracted. You connect your wearable device like a Whoop or an Oura Ring or whatever it is, or even your Apple Health Kit. And at the moment, what they have is these sleep studies going on, right? Where they're essentially trying to do distributed sleep studies where in the real world, for a sleep study, traditionally, you'd have to go into a sleep center. It lasts 2 weeks. It's limited to that specific geography. You don't know what the other factors are, since now you've eliminated things like noise pollution and other things that you would have in your real sleeping environment. And as a result, they're limited both in size of the total participation and in terms of the other like variables that go into it. So with something like Stadium Science, focusing just on the sleep part, and then they'll go into other metrics as well, what they're able to do is create this very rich database of fully encrypted user records relating to sleep and how people recover and how things impact their recovery, coffee at night, whatever it is, right? And then eventually, this is sort of bootstrapping the supply side. You have the demand side that eventually comes in and says, we actually need to understand sleep for whatever reason, medical research, any of these other supplements for sleep, maybe whatever it is. And we want to compute on this data to extract aggregated insights. And we are willing to pay the participants who allow us to compute on their data as a result. And so now you have this model where in a near future, you could have it where the people who are I'm already generating sleep data from my Whoop, right? Like this doesn't change anything for me. All I'm doing is now connecting it to Stadium Science. I'm getting additional insights. There's some gamification to it, leaderboards and other things that make it a fun consumer app. and I'm now also entering into the possibility of it at some point down the road. There's no guarantees around any of this. This is just me speculating how these things will work out. Be paid for that sleep data, right? So that's one example. And we have tons of other, like specifically in the health vertical, because it's sensitive data. There's a lot. But also within AI, we have Pandora, we have Skillful AI, and Pandora, just to give an example, is essentially using NIL AI, our private AI models, to allow users to connect their Telegram, their WhatsApp, all of their emails, Slacks, whatever it is, and have this privacy preserving, personalized AI assistant that helps them navigate and manage their day in a way where it's like, I don't necessarily want to connect my messages with my family and friends to a third party where a random employee could access that, right? But I'm okay with doing it if it's fully privacy preserving, and I know I'm the only one who's able to see that. So a lot of really interesting use cases there. And in the interest of time, I'll stop here for now, but I just wanted to give an idea of what this could lead to eventually.
Right. Yeah. I think it's definitely important to highlight the use cases. Okay, it's pretty interesting. Yeah, so a lot of stuff in the healthcare sector that's actively already in the works. So like this can be like more theoretical, I guess. But like, what kind of other areas and sectors would you guys like to be involved in? Because like AI, healthcare, that's kind of okay. Like I can definitely see the draw, but maybe this is even like more personal for you guys. But yeah, like what other things do you like personally think could benefit from sovereign data?
Dave, I mean, I think this is, I don't know if you want to talk about identity solutions at all. I know you've been doing a lot of research in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the big issues that we face right now, especially in crypto, but it happens in Web 2 as well, is the whole Sybil stuff, right? How do I prove that I'm a human? We've had different people try and solve it in different ways with like big databases of eye scans, right? Which probably isn't the greatest way to go, but kind of this idea that what am I as a human, right? And I think that is a big problem that the world is going to have to solve, because especially as we move into the world of autonomous agents, and me maybe having 3 or 4 or 25 different AI agents doing work for me, who is actually who am I? What am I as a being? And I think that's a really interesting place, because it's an important problem, and it is fundamentally about my privacy as well, because it's going to be my personal data. It's going to be things that uniquely identify me as a human that I can attest to, that I can say, yes, this is me performing this action. This is not a bot attempting to interpret what I would do or impersonate me. And I think that's a really interesting one. I certainly don't have any of the answers, but I think that problem space is huge. And I don't think the world is yet quite mature enough to understand the problem space. Yeah, I definitely don't understand the problem space. But with all of these AI agents coming online, like, who the hell is a human? That's difficult, and I think that's fun. That's a good problem.
I'll add to that, even lower hanging fruit, but kind of within the same branch of problems is KYC, right? Like regardless of whether you think KYC is useful or a complete scam, the fact of the matter is it exists and it is forced by law upon companies like centralized exchanges. What that leads to is, in some cases, what could be considered a clown show of events, and in other cases, just an unfortunate series of events. But what ends up happening is essentially you're uploading a photo of all your most sensitive information, your home address, a picture of your face, and then you're also connecting that to how much money you've on-ramped and then the wallets you've sent it to. And we won't go into like the crypto privacy side of things on the transactional side, but the fact of the matter is that's what most people use today. And so they're creating this sort of very easily connectable trail of all their assets that can pretty easily be surmised by somebody looking into this from the outside, or somebody who has access to this data at least. And as we've seen with breaches this year, Coinbase being the most significant one, these are problems that can be solved, right? Like you could, and maybe Dave can go more into the technical component of how this might be architected, but all you need to do is prove that a certain person is not on a specific list, and also that the person is who they say they are, right? For that to happen, you do not need to hold on to their passport in an unsecured server somewhere that is then going to be sold and leaked on the dark market. So these are security problems that cause companies very serious damage in terms of their reputation, and also paying fees for these sorts of breaches and events. So I don't know, Dave, if you want to touch on that at all, or whether it'd be best to move on to maybe something else.
I don't think I have anything of complete substance to say on that. So
okay,
it's a fun area.
Yeah, and I mean, one other thing that I've posted about in the past, and then we've kind of kicked around a little bit, is also and this ties into more like financial crypto privacy, but we did talk about DeFi a little bit, so I thought it would be worth touching on. Right now, I mean, we just came back from ETH Berlin a couple weeks ago, and it is clear that the whole Ethereum ecosystem is primarily focused on enhancing privacy right now because they see crypto and DeFi as too dangerous for the average person to use simply because it puts them at unnecessary risk relative to like using centralized TradFi rails. And I mean, in some cases just phishing and things like that, in other cases actual physical risk, right, to their personal well-being. And so one of the things that is an obvious attack vector and that many people have talked about at length is this idea of third-party RPCs, essentially collecting RPCs being sort of the connector between you and the blockchain when you submit a transaction, collecting all this information related to, so if you're not using a VPN or your home IP addresses and all of these other things, this also, again, regardless of what the company's intentions are, and most of them are good, lives in a database somewhere that is accessible by somebody. And that information can then be tied to things like wallet addresses and account balance. And these are the sorts of things that criminals later use to reconstruct your digital identity, at least insofar as it relates to your crypto holdings. And that becomes another attack vector that puts innocent people at risk, right? So all of these things can be resolved using the blind computation stack. So these are all things that are more theoretical right now, but they're definitely interesting angles to explore because basically my opinion is that the way Nillion relates to crypto and DeFi more broadly is making it safer for users. And that's going to be a huge thing as more and more, let's call them non-crypto natives, start to use these tools and don't think about these things, right? Because why should anybody ever have to think about these things? They should just be safe and private by default.
Right. I think it's definitely good to touch on. Yeah, I mean, Ethereum, it definitely seems like sometimes people give it flack for like being too ideological as a community, but yeah, definitely you would want to tap into that side of things for developing these kind of private solutions for DeFi specifically. And yeah, in crypto there already are like a lot of these gaps. There's Coinbase, there's World, Humanity, like you have multiple of these kind of blockchain solutions for proof of humanity now. And yeah, even like not even expanding into the like Web2 side of things, there are already actually a lot of areas for crypto itself to be improved with this kind of tech. So yeah, I think it's definitely good to touch on that. But I mean, it is a crypto pod, so I think we also have to touch a little bit on the NIL token. So yeah, I think we actually published a report on the NIL token. So as much as possible, yeah, can you guys explain like how does NIL kind of tie into the broader vision for Nillion and specifically, yeah, because you mentioned earlier one like around the monetization of the data specifically, right, as a key factor, right? Because you have like okay, you can educate people, make them want to use a private solution, and then what makes their ears perk up is probably more on like okay, how can I actually monetize this, right? I can basically earn passively for my own data, my own personal data. I can even kind of like set like a limit order almost kind of thing for my own data. So yeah, how does that tie in? How does the NIL token tie into the broader Nillion vision?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I should clarify first and foremost is that the NIL token is something that is mainly being used and purchased by the people submitting blind compute requests, right? So in the same way that Dave earlier spoke about, like if you use AWS, you pay AWS for AWS credits, Amazon Web Services. That's the same model that you want to think about here. We see the growth of AI and the growth of blind compute being intertwined very closely. And so our projections around compute usage are very closely correlated to the potential total addressable market of AI applications, especially as we see more people coming on board. So from a consumer standpoint, if you're an end user and you want to participate in securing the network, like any other network, you could stake to a NIL chain node validator, which Dave touched on briefly before. But aside from that, NIL chain and Nillion in particular are not like other blockchains that you might be familiar with, right? Like in terms of interacting directly with the token, that is the extent of it. Most of the magic with the token is happening behind the scenes as a relationship between the applications and the network. So basically what that means is if you think that blind compute, based on what we've said today and other research you do, if you think that blind compute is going to continue increasing in terms of demand, then by correlation, and I have to be careful about what I say, and I can't share too much other than what is publicly available right now, but the correlation would be that NIL token would also be tied to that, right? Because you need NIL token to submit compute requests to the network. And maybe Dave, you can talk a little bit about like how that's done, right? When you have NIL token, how do you submit the request to the network and pay for it with NIL token? But that's the relationship that people should understand. Blind compute is powered by NIL token. NIL token is used to pay for blind compute.
Yeah, I mean, I think to put it in as simple terms as possible, AWS compute power is one of the most valuable resources in the world, right? The same with GCP, with all of the big cloud providers, right? It's really, really valuable. Now, the NIL token essentially acts as the credit gateway system into using the blind computer. So in the world where people are using the blind computer in the same way they are using AWS to store data, to compute on data, to do that, but do it privately, the NIL token is that gateway. So I think that's the easiest analogy where, it's the gateway in, it's your AWS credit token. And I think that's the easiest way for people to currently understand it.
Right.
Maybe
Yeah,
like
I
an
think it's
easy analogy would be
very
like,
good. No, go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, you can almost think about it as like back in the day, cell phone minutes, right? You have 200 cell phone minutes that you buy, and those are your credits to make calls, right? And that's the relationship. That's as simple analogy as I can think of.
Right. Yeah. I think definitely in crypto, you always have to like break things down simply. Yeah. Especially like when explaining utility around these things. So, okay. I mean, we're coming up on time in a bit. So I think let's kind of definitely left the audience with a very good like overview of what, like, especially the problem side of things and like why, like more broadly, like the thesis for blind compute, and then actually getting into the architecture of Nillion. So yeah, I think now we can kind of talk a little bit more about the future. So yeah, I think your recent you had the roadmap release recently, which outlined 3 main stages, right? So after mainnet, yeah, like what is next? What are some of the kind of like on the technical side? What are kind of the hurdles that you guys are looking to jump over in the next 1 to 3 months?
Yeah, so I'll increase that timeline to more like 3 to 6 months. But what we have now, okay, so putting aside, I know this is a crypto podcast, but putting aside the crypto aspect, this petnet is the thing that's the interesting thing, right? It's powered on crypto rails, which is fantastic, but this storage layer and compute layer, the blind computer, in this first phase does storage and basic compute really well. I'll give you an example. One of our ecosystem partners has now stored, I think, 300 million data points under MPC in our network. And my PhD was in MPC, right? And when I was doing it 10 years ago, the things that we're using MPC were like sugar beet auctions, so like tiny little proof of concepts, right? We have one company, and it's just one of a number that have put 300 million data points stored in this thing. Like, this thing works at scale. This is cool. This is phase 0. Like, we have this and we have our AI stack. We can now run state-of-the-art LLMs securely, which is awesome. The next phase, so this is what we have now. The next phase is more about general compute. So we already have unlocked monadic DNA to do some of their compute inside TEs, but we want to broaden that. So essentially, I can come in and write any of my code. So I have my Python code, I have my JavaScript code. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm doing an auction, I'm doing a vote, I'm sequencing DNA. It doesn't matter. I can take that workload and I can upload that and run it in a TE. Like, we want to make that seamless. And that's like the next phase, to make this general compute really accessible. We currently have a really strong AI compute, but we want to make the general compute really good so that I write code in any language and I can just run that inside the TE, no questions asked, all done. We believe those 2 things, so what we have now, the storage side and the AI compute, and then this general compute, broadly mean that the blind computer is quote unquote done. That doesn't mean it's the final blind computer we'll end up with, but anybody can point to that thing and say that's a blind computer. The third phase that we're talking about here is we want to take the things that we've got there and polish them. Because as I said earlier, the difficult part about what we are doing is not necessarily the technical aspect of the cryptography, etc. That's not easy. But the most difficult part is making this trade-off for developers an easy one. Saying, you can use our stuff and it's no more difficult than doing it without privacy. And that is what this third phase is about. It's making this thing a no-brainer to say, oh, well, there's no trade-off because doing it the private way is just as easy as doing it the non-private way. And that's what this third phase is about. Once we have our basic blind computer finished, which we will in, let's say, 3 to 6 months time, it's then making this thing really usable, because that's the hardest problem in our industry by a long way, making this thing usable and getting people to use it.
Well said. Yeah, Juan. Anything else that you guys want to add before we sign off here?
No, the last thing is it completely. I had a complete sort of brain pause there, but Dave reminded me with this reference to this application that's storing so many records. Another huge vertical for us is DPIN, right? So, and I'll leave this in case you want to check out a few more of the apps building on Nillion if you're listening to this. There's the one that Dave is referring to, I believe, is SoarChain. And SoarChain is basically a small hardware device you plug into your car, and it privately generates insights about all the kinds of things that a car manufacturer would want to know about that vehicle that they can only get currently once a year when you take your car for its annual checkup. And you get paid for that data, right? Because it's valuable for them to understand how their cars are performing, engine, all sorts of other things. So that's one. And of course, for insurance quotes and all that, it helps you as a consumer get better insurance quotes because you're doing this all this privately, and the insurers are having to deal with this in a way that they're essentially trying to find averages and aggregated insights rather than saying like, oh, you specifically, Daniel, were a really bad driver, or you took a left turn too fast, therefore we're going to penalize you because you're sharing your data. And there's a lot of kind of insurance hardware apps you can plug in right now that act in that way. And instead of this is saying, well, we know in aggregate that users of this sort of type do X, Y, or Z, and therefore this is how we're going to adjust our premiums. So you can actually share your data and monetize it without being penalized if, for example, you run a red light by accident, right? So that's one thing. And then there's Nubula, another one that just launched on Nillion, which is around the weather data market. So that's actually a huge market. This is a new thing for me. I'm learning new things all the time at Nillion because there's so many different verticals that are leveraging our technology. But essentially, it's a DPIN hardware device you put in your home. It's like a mini weather monitor, and that is trying to generate a distributed look at certain geographical regions, and that's used for like farmers crop insurance and all kinds of other things, and drone delivery systems to factor in. And all this stuff is being uploaded in an encrypted manner into NilDB and then being computed on privately. So DPIN is another huge vertical. Dave's comment reminded me of that. So yeah, I'd make sure to check that out as well.
Yeah, I think very good note to end on there. Yeah, is emphasizing the kind of like consumer side of things that people that on a daily basis, yeah, it's something you interact with, but don't think about. Yeah, like data sharing, I know it's become a big thing for with EVs, especially recently, or even stuff like yeah, the sleep optimization, stuff like that. So I think it's definitely good to tap into those kind of things that people maybe didn't like associate with Nillion on the ecosystem side. And yeah, so Juan, Dave, thank you guys for coming on. And yeah, if you guys are listening, we'll have some resources linked below. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Daniel.
Cheers.
See you later.